I'm Ashley Wulkan, feeding therapist, occupational therapist, and lactation consultant. Look forward to discussing all things feeding so that we can support you to bring your little one to their maximum potential so that feeding can be enjoyable for the entire family.
Are you looking for a community of other moms joining together to support their little one through the ups and downs of feeding and gross motor milestones? The Thriving Together community is just for you. Find us on social media at Instagram, Facebook, and www.sensorysolutionsTherapy.com to learn more. We look forward to seeing you.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Feeding Solutions podcast. Today, I have Ashley Wulkan with me, and she's a clinical nutritionist and herbalist who works with her focus is nourishing moms and babies with a focus on tending to the microbiome, balancing minerals, and grounding the nervous system. Through her clinical practice and online presence, she guides women towards their bodies to understand their own physiology and rebuild trust in their innate wisdom. Ashley weaves science with story, evidence with intuition, and her passionate ability to restore nourishment is truly generational. And it's interesting that I am talking to people who are really taking this outlook on like this generational impact. Like we're looking beyond like the tip of our nose. So I'm so excited that you're here. So welcome. Can't wait to get to know you more. And again, thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me, Ashley.
Absolutely. All right. So get started with just kind of giving me a little bit of background, like what drew you into this mama baby space, this supporting motherhood. Share with me with
Yeah.
that.
I think like the natural healthcare piece of things, I've always been doing that. I was that little girl that would like make potions with flowers and sticks
Oh,
and, stirring mud in the backyard, maybe making my little sister drink that for her healing of her mysterious ailment. Um, and we grew up kind of rural. I
hmm.
remember my grandma like taking me out to pick rose hips. We always
Nice.
talked to the trees. We knew the names, and it was just sort of how we related to the world. So
Mhm.
when I got older and moved off to the city, I realized that that was actually really special. Not everyone relates to the world
Mhm.
like that. My grandmother probably never heard the word herbalist, but if she were born today, that's probably what she would want to do.
Right.
Um,
Right.
so getting into natural healthcare was really natural to me. I've always been obsessed with food. I remember my grandpa would always make like the 24-hour bone broth after Thanksgiving with the turkey
Mm.
bones. And I just knew there was healing in that. So going to school for nutrition was sort of the most obvious choice that I could think of if I had to, fit my interests into the conventional model box and go get a degree
Hmm.
in something.
Hmm.
Um, and then you get into this work and you realize that mothers are the ones who need it most. I was like 20 years
Absolutely.
old and moms were coming to me, and I realized really quickly these are the most depleted people in society, and they are
Hmm.
also the ones who are feeding society. So we need to
So
do
true.
something about this.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, what was your first experience with a mama who was struggling with feeding difficulties, and like what was something that jumped out at you?
Yeah, we were chatting about this before we hit record, but if
Yeah.
I go all the way back to the first experiences, and what I know now versus what I know then, it wasn't really something that was on my radar until
Mm.
more recently when I had
Hmm.
my own baby. Um, but my first experiences would have been those moms who reached out to me as an herbalist saying, "Hey, I just had a baby. I'm struggling with milk supply. Could you make me a tea or a tincture or something?" And we learn about herbal galactagogues in school, and I would blend that up for them and never really thought twice about it. And then I had my own baby and I learned about breastfeeding and read all these books about breastfeeding, joined peer support groups for breastfeeding, and really realized that the way that I relate to those type of cases needed to change forever because I think there's a lot of doubt and distrust in women's
Mm.
bodies. Like we
Hmm.
have that in our own
Hmm.
bodies and also society taught that to us, right?
Absolutely.
So this, I wish I could take back every single tea and tincture that I had handed out and instead to sit down with those women and say,
Hmm.
hey, why do you think this is an issue? And if it truly is an issue, a tea or a tincture is probably not what you need. Or what they really needed was support and reassurance to know
Hmm.
that actually they didn't have a problem with their milk supply. So
Right.
those would be those first experiences. And I think the thing that has stuck with me the most is actually how poorly equipped I was to handle them and how much more education we need in healthcare at every level, whether it's at the medical level, people working at the hospitals, all the way to the fringe, crunchy granola herbalists.
Hmm.
We
Hmm.
none of us really have
It's
adequate
true.
lactation training.
Right, right. Well, and so having worked with moms struggling with babies in their feeding journey, over the past decade or so, seeing how critical it is to help moms with their doubt and
Mm.
how they lose this their self their intuition, that they're relying on their gut. And I think it's so true, like how you were saying, oh, here, like take this it's really just feeding, like, oh, my body
Yeah.
is not able to do what it needs to do. So I'm so glad that you're kind of breathing life into women to help them know like their body's good and it can provide what their baby needs. So
Yeah.
that's excellent. That's excellent. So let's talk about like what you view maybe as like your top pillars in the work that you do, like microbiome. I see things that you're talking about, minerals and nervous system. So like how does that all kind of come together in what you're doing?
Yeah, I love that question. Those are definitely my three pillars: microbiome, minerals, nervous system. And we're obviously talking about maternal health, but I do
Mm,
believe that this absolutely extends to all of human health. These really
sure,
are the pillars.
sure,
It
sure.
always comes back to these three things. Like every single case comes back to these three things. And on the microbiome side, so, humans are basically a collection of non-human organisms. That's kind
Mm-hmm.
of what it boils down to.
Yes.
And whatever area of our health we're looking at, there's always some sort of connection back to the microbiome. And we have really messed with that in the last
Mm-hmm.
100 or so years through the way that we're treating things with antibiotics. Antibiotics were discovered before this concept of the human microbiome was discovered. So we
Mm-hmm.
actually
Makes
started
sense.
tinkering with this before we even
Mm-hmm.
discovered it. So essentially, we have no baseline for what the human
Yeah.
microbiome would look like pre-intervention and interference,
Wow.
which is,
It's
you
wild. Gosh,
right?
when you think about that. Jeez.
Yeah. And there's some grief that comes with that,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
We almost kind of
Absolutely.
started destroying something before we even knew
Knew
that
that
it
it
was
exists.
there.
Mm.
So it was in the blind spot. And you definitely see this. I bet you see this all the time in your work because we are really interfering with mama baby microbiomes, you
Hmm.
know, starting at birth. So again, we don't even really know what we're playing with. We have some studies now showing, okay, there are differences in infant microbiomes depending on how the baby was born, and some of those
Hmm.
differences may or may not work themselves out. Obviously,
Right.
whether or not we have rounds of antibiotics, whether or not we are prescribing proton pump inhibitors for the baby. Like
Hmm.
all of these
Hmm.
things, the research is so in just the beginning, but the
It is.
practice is quite well established. So it's hard to
Absolutely.
even know how much is being affected by the things that we're doing. So
Hmm.
I think microbiome stuff that goes all the way back to infancy. The number one thing that influences an infant's microbiome is the maternal microbiome. That's the number one thing,
Absolutely. Right.
right? So just
Hmm.
knowing that already, the importance of taking care of mothers is so obvious there.
Hmm.
And then the mineral side of things. So the microbiome is very flashy and cool, and there's all this new science. It's easy to get a bit distracted and focus so much on feeding your microbiome and getting your fiber and your polyphenols and all the things that support that. We can kind of lose sight of our own human cells and what they need in order to function. So that's where the minerals come in. And
Okay. That makes sense.
they go back to the gut too, right? If we
Hmm.
aren't absorbing from our food because we
Right.
have gut issues, we're going to lose those ability to get all the minerals we need. And if we are depleted of minerals like sodium and zinc. We're not going to be making the stomach acid, the digestive secretions that we need in order for our gut health to be working properly. So it's kind of this
Mm-hmm.
like two-way mirror, or
Makes
how do you call it?
sense.
Like it goes from
Yeah.
both sides.
Yeah.
Um, and then everything kind of boils back down to the nervous system. I always tell people if this overwhelms you, you're not sure where to
Yeah.
start with the nervous system, right? That is
Yes.
the absolute foundation of everything. It's where we foster either a feeling of safety in our body or not safety, which is going to change everything from how your genetics are expressed to how your digestion is functioning to what your mineral burn rate is looking like. So that kind of
Mm. Okay.
baseline feeling of whether or not you feel safe in the world is the most important thing. I always tell people it's like a light switch. So if stress is on, then digestion is off. Like you cannot have a light
Mm.
switch pointing in both directions at once. It's
Yes.
one
Yes.
setting. So when
Right.
you're stressed, you're not going to be digesting. When you're stressed, you're going to be burning through your minerals a lot
Mm-hmm.
faster. So
Mm-hmm.
stress is the most depleting thing that exists to the human organism. So
Mm.
whatever you can do to start supporting your nervous system, whether that's like literally getting out for a 5-minute walk once a day, like that's going to be the most important practice to work on over stressing about like what probiotic to be taking.
Yes. Yes. Well, every mama and baby that are in my world, we're talking about down regulating the nervous system. Everyone is stressed and overwhelmed
Yeah.
because they've been trying to do this natural thing all this time, and it's not so natural and instinctual, and so they're literally in a place of fight or flight. And so
Yeah.
this information is so critical because it's simple and it can remind them that like simplicity can be so helpful to get your nervous system in a better place.
Yeah.
So,
And it can
so,
be so dysregulating. I remember I had this one
mhm,
moment with my baby where, and I would say my breastfeeding journey was incredibly vanilla and
mhm,
pretty much without issue.
mhm.
But even then, right? Even then,
Oh,
it's still
right.
hard and all this stuff that goes on mentally and the
Hmm.
doubt. And, at one point we were dealing with a lot of spitting up, and someone had given me the advice to just try and slow down her feeds, like let her feed for a little bit, stop her. That is so much easier said than done.
Absolutely.
I will never forget just this moment I had where I had, unlatched her and she was crying so much. And there's no way to communicate with this little human
Mhm.
that I'm not taking away your food and your comfort. Like we're just
Yes.
taking a break.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
her cry was so activating to me. And then I started crying. And it was just, I will never forget in that moment was the only time in my motherhood journey so far that I have thought, like, this is so hard. I don't know if I can do this.
Mm.
And as soon as I caught that thought, I was like, okay, breathe. Because I know that's the fastest way
Yes.
to shift from sympathetic
Yeah,
to
aesthetic to
parasympathetic,
aesthetic. You're right.
and that's going to help her shift too. And I am
Hmm.
so grateful that I had that tool and that knowing to come back to, because it made all the
Absolutely.
difference in that moment. And like I said, my journey was so easy. I can only imagine the
Hmm.
people who are having those moments
Right.
multiple times a
Multiple
day
times a
over
day.
extended periods of time,
Right.
right? Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. So as we're trying to like support that overwhelmed mom who's already having to do a lot of things, like what's
Yeah.
something that you recommend that where do they start when they're trying to nourish their body in that postpartum stage?
Yeah, it's already so much. And it's almost like a cruel joke that at the time of your
Mm.
life when you require the most care is the time that you are biologically wired to not even think about yourself and not care about
So
yourself at all.
true. So
I know
true.
it's brutal. So I would just tell any mama who's there, just come back to the absolute basics, and truly
Hmm.
just eating is
Hmm.
so underrated. Adequate calories,
Hmm.
adequate carbohydrates, even if they're not, whatever perfect optimal nutrition you think would be better for your body,
Hmm.
just eating enough, because under eating is the biggest threat to you when you are in the immediate postpartum. Regardless of what
Hmm.
you are eating, if you are not eating enough, that is the biggest threat to you. And then if you have capacity to go a couple layers deeper beyond
Hmm.
just eating enough, you can
Hmm.
add electrolytes to your water. You can drink bone broths. You can
Hmm.
eat soups that are made with those, slow extracted broths.
Hmm.
I really love a slow cooker for a
Okay.
postpartum mom. If you've got
Hmm.
5, 10 minutes, you can get your partner in the morning. If they're going off to work, maybe they can put some stuff in the slow cooker before they leave. And
It's
if
great.
you're prioritizing which foods, my favorite foods for postpartum mothers are proteins that are really rich in glycine. So think about
Okay.
anything that has bones involved or
Hmm.
tendons involved. So putting a whole chicken in your slow cooker versus getting a pack of like chicken breasts and putting that
Mm.
in your slow cooker. You're going to be
Hmm.
getting more of that
Hmm.
glycine with the whole chicken. And
Okay.
that's really important for tissue healing. That's one of the most important nutrients for your nervous system. So just
Nice.
those little shifts of knowing to like pick the meat on the bone, throw it in the slow cooker. If you have the capacity, those things make a huge difference.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that's a great tip because we're all, to some degree, probably having to cook or have someone to cook for us. So just that simple tip of like, let's get the meat that's on the bone and cook the bones as well.
Yeah.
So that's huge. That's huge. So, okay. So we're talking about gut health. So explain what that connection looks like, gut health and like a feeding struggle that a parent might be experiencing.
Yeah. So, I mean, Ash, you're probably the expert on the different types of feeding struggles that people have. I feel like this is absolutely not my area of expertise. But when I think about even just the nervous system piece,
Yeah.
the gut microbiome has a direct line of communication to your brain through the vagus
Mm-hmm.
nerve.
Mm-hmm.
And there's this constant two-way conversation where if your mind is stressed, you're sending signals down to your gut like,
Mm-hmm.
hey, dude, don't worry about digesting and assimilating the nutrients from that lasagna
Right.
I just ate because we're about to run from a bear, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
sending
Mm-hmm.
those signals down to the gut and vice versa. If a lot of women go through birth and there can be a lot of interventions, there can be a lot of antibiotics, there can be a lot of things where you're essentially landing in motherhood with a totally different microbiome than you had like 2 or 3 weeks ago. And
Interesting.
like I think of that and I think that
Yeah.
that piece goes sort of under
Mm-hmm.
appreciated that
Mm-hmm.
how much postpartum anxiety I wonder is just the normal anxiety that we know happens after a round of antibiotics. That's like known side effect of antibiotics. We know that even a person who has no children, isn't pregnant, like not in the
Mm-hmm.
perinatal space at all, can take a round of antibiotics and experience anxiety and depression just because
Mm.
of that. And then we're giving women, IV antibiotics for GBS during birth.
Yes.
We're
Yeah.
having antibiotics and IV proton pump inhibitors during a surgical birth. And now we're just handing these women a new baby, and any dysfunction that they experience in terms of their mood, their mental health, we're chalking that up to like postpartum hormones. I
Mm.
think there's more to it than that,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That makes so
right?
much sense. Yeah. Makes so much
Yeah.
sense.
So
Well,
then
and
we've got that
just
nervous system dysregulation. And as you kind of noted, like a lot of feeding challenges come back to that
right.
alone. So I think
Yeah.
just that safety is the thing
Mm-hmm.
to focus on supporting, but don't forget about your gut in all of this because I think
Yeah.
it plays a bigger role. I don't have research to point to because
Yeah.
I think we're just at the
We're
beginning
at the
of
beginning.
asking these
Yeah.
questions. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, like the role of minerals. So, I really, besides like electrolyte powders, as far as
Yeah.
minerals go, like explain a little bit of how that's supporting mom in that postpartum stage and the lactating mama. Every mama that comes into my world, they're either in this oversupply state or they're in this
Mm.
undersupply state. So, like, we're talking about milk supply all the time. And
Yeah.
so, the fact that I know very little about minerals, that's probably a piece that could support that. So, kind of explain that a little bit.
Yeah. So minerals, I'm glad that you said about electrolytes because I think you're right. I think a lot of people, when they hear minerals, that's
Mm-hmm.
kind of the first thing that we
Yeah.
think about. And it's just even how we relate to everything in our culture is
Mm-hmm.
like, what's a product that I can buy? That's sort of how we're
Yes.
trained to think,
Yes. Oh,
right? Yeah.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah. So we think minerals, we think, oh, okay, I'll go buy an electrolyte. You don't have to buy an electrolyte, by the way. You can DIY it. If you can get some coconut water or something from the
Okay.
store, put, half a cup to a cup of coconut water into your water bottle, fill the rest with
Okay.
water, put a pinch of salt in there. You just basically made your own food-based
Hmm.
electrolytes. We don't always need to be buying the powders.
Okay.
Um, Food is the most important thing. So I would point to, I think potassium is a really good example. Potassium is something you're going to get like 200 milligrams of potassium from an electrolyte powder, but a breastfeeding mother is going to need like 5,000 milligrams per day of
Wow.
potassium. So
Okay.
you're really
Okay.
not moving the needle with your electrolyte powder.
Yeah.
It
Okay.
really needs to come from food. And it's the number one mineral that I see depleted
Mm-hmm.
after pregnancy, birth, breastfeeding,
Mm-hmm.
especially if there's been multiple children. And potassium is sort of like the chauffeur mineral where it's bringing things into the cells. So we can
Mm-hmm.
use thyroid hormone as a really good example here. So postpartum issues with thyroid health are very, very common. And it's
Okay.
the mineral potassium that's actually responsible for bringing that thyroid hormone and delivering it into the cell. So if we are
Okay.
depleted of potassium, we're immediately going to be more likely to have thyroid issues. Things are not going to be getting delivered into the cell, right? So you can have
Mm-hmm.
calcium hanging out, building up in your soft tissue. We start to get all these aches and pains that are totally normalized in motherhood. We start to have thyroid issues because the thyroid's very sensitive to calcification. So even just something as simple as getting back to like the amount of produce that you're eating in a day. Are
Mm-hmm.
you getting, a couple cups of green veggies in? Are you, looking at, are you trying to like lose weight, bounce back culture kind of thing,
Right.
avoiding the
Gosh.
potatoes, avoiding the bananas, avoiding all that high potassium stuff?
Yes.
So
Makes sense.
low potassium, thyroid issues, these can be medical reasons why someone might actually not make enough milk. So that's where I think always just going
Yeah.
back to auditing if there are milk supply issues. I mean, undersupply. I don't really know about oversupply other than that like
Yeah.
pumping can play a
Right.
role or something.
Yeah.
Um, Probably not as much driven by nutrition as something
Yeah.
like undersupply can be, but
Yes.
just looking at what's going in is sort of
Mm-hmm.
baseline. I think the most important thing to ask about.
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay, so we were talking about nervous system earlier, and obviously the nervous system dysregulation, that's going to impact mom and baby. What are some other simple ways that you're supporting mom's nervous system to help regulate them through the lenses that you function?
Yeah. So in terms of like regulating the nervous system, I
Hmm.
mean, our baby's nervous systems mirror ours all the way back from when they were in utero, our
Hmm.
adrenal status, what we were teaching them. And then they come out into the world and their first 12 months are basically just deciding whether or not the world is safe based on all of the experiences that they're having, right?
Hmm.
That's sort of the
Hmm.
thing that the babies are doing.
Hmm.
So any way that we can regulate our nervous system is going to be beneficial to them. And that's as simple as like, go outside. I think going outside is probably,
Yes,
oh, it's the most underrated. And
it
I had a
is.
baby in February in Northern Ontario where it was negative
Okay.
30. So I'm not going to
Yeah,
pretend like getting outside
it
postpartum
was
is always,
easy.
yeah, right. It can be challenging, but even just I would take 5 minutes in the morning. I would go stand on my front porch, which is east facing. So I was
Hmm.
getting those early morning sun
Hmm.
rays coming up, getting my body signaled that, okay, everything's safe, everything's okay. That's
Hmm.
going to regulate my hormone production. Like that is really fundamental. So whatever you can do to get outside and remembering that it's in any capacity. You can just stand on
Yes.
your front porch. You can have your coffee standing 1 foot outside your door. You can open up your window and just stick your face outside. It
Yeah.
can be really
Hmm.
simple.
Hmm.
Um, the more time we spend outside, the better our nervous system is going to be. But start with whatever you can do. And
Hmm.
then always, you'll hear me say it the answer to every single question is eat enough. So if
Yeah.
you can really look at the amount of food that you're eating, most of the time, if you add more calories in and you're not feeling well, you will start feeling better because
Hmm.
undernourishment is like the epidemic of motherhood. Women are just
That's so true.
not eating enough.
They're not. They're not. And again, the type of food as well, I mean, I remember like what could I eat with one hand? Like maybe I was
Hmm.
eating, but if it required me to like hold a bowl or like was I gonna drop whatever I was eating like on my baby that I was wearing? Oh, nope, that's probably
Yeah.
not a safe, and so just silly things, but it's so true. It's so important to be.
Yeah. That's a good tip, actually. When I was, obviously, I like did a whole postpartum meal prep when I was pregnant. I like filled my freezer with meals and meals.
Mhm.
Highly recommend. I'm sure that a lot of people don't get to your podcast until they already had the baby. But if there
Yeah.
happens to be any pregnant mothers listening to this right
Yeah.
now, fill your freezer with whatever you can.
That's
And in
great.
particular, I was posting on Instagram, like, here's all the recipes I'm putting in my freezer. One of my clients messaged me and she was like, hey, girl. Uh, love that you're making all these beautiful stews for yourself. I don't know if you are familiar with the nature of motherhood, but you're gonna want some like one-handed snacks. And I am forever grateful that she sent me that message because then I made a bunch of muffins and cookies. And what the heck was I thinking? Like stew is like in theory, it's a great postpartum food. In practice,
Yes,
not so
right.
much.
No, but I mean it reminds us that the type of foods that we are eating, they have to count, you
Yes.
know. So that's very true. Okay, so herbalist, I know very
Yeah.
little about that, like I have little tinctures that I use, but it's been because I've been told to do this or that. But like in the postpartum space, for the like safety for the mom, the lactating mom, like what are your recommendations of things that mom should be using, like particularly from a milk supply standpoint, postpartum healing,
Yeah.
thing that
Well,
you
first, I
recommend?
will definitely, you may already know about this resource and connect your clients with it, but there's an incredible online database that you can easily look up the safety in
Okay.
breastfeeding for most herbs, elactantia.org. So it's
Okay.
e-lactantia.org. And they're fantastic. They will even lay out, what the research was based on. So as
Nice.
an
Okay.
herbalist, I use it all the time. And even some of the herbs that say like, oh, maybe not so much recommended because they're laying out the research that it was based on. Sometimes I, as an herbalist, will look at those studies and
That makes
feel pretty
sense.
comfortable actually
Yeah.
that,
Okay.
it wasn't really this herb that was associated with the,
Okay.
right? So sometimes,
Yes.
anyway, the information is fantastic. So I would definitely recommend that to anyone who's breastfeeding and who's wondering about herbal safety. There's a
Okay.
lot of really terrible, ridiculous information out there. I had a mother reach out recently. She's American, I'm Canadian, and she had been told she hadn't even given birth yet, but she had mentioned to her OB, like, oh, I'm really excited to be able to have some teas and herbs again and, have some chamomile. And her OB told her that if she wanted to drink chamomile tea, she should consider just feeding her baby formula because there's no research showing that herbs are safe in
Yeah.
breastfeeding.
Yeah.
And that, like, I saw red, Ashley, when
Oh, I'm
she
sure.
reached out. And I don't give medical advice, to people on the internet,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm so
Mm-hmm.
happy that she did reach out because there's actually a strong safety record for chamomile, not only in breastfeeding, but actually it's approved for use in infants directly through gripe water that you can buy at any
Yeah.
pharmacy. In other
Yeah.
countries, it's actually a first line recommendation. If a baby's gassy or something, they will tell the mother, hey, drink some chamomile tea. It'll go into your breast milk. It can be helpful for baby. So just do remember that if you are getting information about herbal safety from somebody who didn't go to school for herbal safety and who maybe received education that was biased against the use
Yeah.
of herbs, you're probably not getting the
Right.
best
Accurate.
education. So make sure you have your
Mm-hmm.
own tools.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I don't recommend messaging random herbalists on the internet, but I am happy to answer questions when they come
Mm-hmm.
up and when I have the
Mm-hmm.
capacity for it. I will share some of my favorites for postpartum though, because I feel like that's the real question that you asked. So, nettle and oat straw infusions are
Mm.
probably my favorite go-to. I
Okay.
try to get all my postpartum clients drinking that. Nettle is really mineral rich, and then oat straw is a tropher restorative for the nervous system, we call it in
Oh,
herbal medicine, which
nice.
basically means it rebuilds the tissue. So
Okay.
just daily
Nice.
infusions of those, they're nutritive tonics. They're not like pharmacologically active. It's like in
Mm-hmm.
addition to food, getting extra minerals, getting
Mm-hmm.
extra nutrition. My husband, I would ask him, so I had a big jar blended of oat straw and nuttall, and before he would come to bed, I would ask him to just put a big scoop in a French press, fill it with boiling water, and let it sit on the counter overnight so then I could drink that whenever I was up
Nice.
with baby or the next day or
Nice.
whatever.
Okay.
Um,
Okay.
Motherwort is another that I really love, especially for those super burnt out, really stressed out moms. You
Hmm.
had a difficult birth and you feel like you haven't been able to get your bearings since then. That's a great herb. It's
Okay.
literally named for its traditional use, which is the herb for mothers. Um,
Yes.
and then for milk supply, so you asked about milk supply. I'm always hesitant because when you look at the research, it's not that great. And
Hmm.
I think it can be a distraction from getting real help. So most of the
Hmm.
time that there is actually a milk supply issue, it's related to something that herbs aren't going to help. And even if they do increase supply a little bit, that background issue of maybe
Right.
inefficient transfer or whatever it is still
Yeah.
going to be happening. So it's like you're
Hmm.
using herbs and things are getting better for maybe a week or two. But
Hmm.
in the meantime, that background issue is actually getting worse. So we
Hmm.
don't want to be doing that.
Yeah. Yeah. I
I
love
think
that.
like moringa is one that there's okay research on. Again, I wouldn't say the research on any herbs for milk supply is like stellar, but
Right.
moringa, the research is okay in terms of it increasing prolactin. Um,
Okay.
it's kind of a food-based thing. Like I would say it's okay to include if you really, really
Okay.
need that peace of mind, but
Hmm.
I would never treat low supply with herbs first. And now when
Okay.
someone comes to me with that question, I'm immediately asking, is baby growing? Are they having enough wet diapers? If the answer is yes, you probably don't have a supply issue. I think you actually just need a pep talk and to trust your body.
Yeah. Right.
Or if the answer to those questions is no, we need to get someone involved who is not an herbalist and nutritionist. Like this is not the
Hmm.
right skill set.
Hmm.
We need to get an
Hmm.
IBCLC or
Yeah.
we need to get
Yeah.
someone looking at baby's latch, or we need to get blood work on mom. We need to understand if there's actually a
Hmm.
medical issue going
Hmm.
on. But I would say like 95% of the time, herbs are probably not the answer.
Yeah. Well, and then that also goes like the all of the other things like the lactation cookies. And I was having a conversation with a couple of moms this week who were they had lactation cookies, lactation brownies like in their hands, but then they were
Yeah.
flipping over and looking at the ingredients and the sugar content, and they were blown away when they were actually looking at what they were actually ingesting, and they were like, okay, maybe this wasn't the best purchase because
Yeah. And you like the research really does not stand
mm-hmm,
up to any individual food being able to increase milk supply. Like,
mm-hmm,
increasing your calories is probably the main mechanism there, if you even feel like it is helping. Or like you're eating delicious cookies and brownies, so you're getting that oxytocin, right? Like the mechanism, there's
right,
nothing magical in these things.
yeah,
And I'm a nutritionist. I stocked my freezer. I made all these like lactation cookies with the oats and the
yeah,
flax seeds and
yeah,
whatever because it's just so ingrained in our culture that, well, if you're going to breastfeed, you're going to need to worry about your milk supply, right?
yes,
Like
so
now I look at
true.
that and I cringe, but yeah, you don't need to buy any special food in order to breastfeed. You just need to eat enough food.
So is there any other feeding advice that you're seeing going around that makes you cringe or like, oh, try this, take this? Like, what else are you seeing that from your viewpoint, you're like, I'm not
Yeah.
100% agreement with that?
Yeah, I think the milk supply thing is the biggest one for
Hmm.
me. Just this idea that like no one's making enough milk and we all need all this support in order to feed our babies with our
Hmm.
bodies. This whole thing about, oh, I just make enough, and that's like a source of anxiety is
Hmm.
that's probably the biggest thing for me because it's actually very specifically designed for your body to just make enough. Like just enough is
Exactly.
enough. And more than
Yes.
that is depleting you for no benefit to your baby,
Hmm.
right? Like taking out
Hmm.
more milk than your baby actually needs is just pulling from your own mineral stores. And we know from research that they've done by looking at women's bone density while they are breastfeeding, that we lose bone density during lactation, and that the amount of bone density that we lose is directly correlated with how much milk we are removing. So we see higher bone loss in mothers of twins,
It's
triplets who
wild.
are removing more milk. And you think about that. I mean, we regain that bone density after
Okay.
we finished breastfeeding,
Okay.
with obviously, context being important there. You need to be eating well and you need to be exercising and building that bone
Right.
density. But our bodies are designed to do this. But why would
Mm-hmm.
you deplete your body more than is needed and
Mm-hmm.
make it harder for you to then rebound? Because many, many women are going from having a baby, breastfeeding that baby, taking not that long in between becoming pregnant again. So if we're looking
Mm-hmm.
at a woman's life and she's having, 5, 6, 7 years where her bone density is reduced and she's pumping all this extra milk on top of it, it's just begs the
It's
question, like, why are we doing this to
mm-hmm.
our bodies if it's not actually benefiting our babies? So I think the biggest thing that makes me cringe is like this pumping culture, this trying to
Oh,
induce an
it's
oversupply to fill
crazy.
the freezer. And when you
Yes.
know about what that does to the body, it's hard not to look at that and think like, oh, it is you're feeding your own insecurity at the detriment of your body, when maybe you just need to sit down with like a therapist or a
Yeah.
peer support in breastfeeding, or
Mm-hmm.
somebody who can just let you know it's actually okay
Yes.
to just make enough to feed your baby and to
Yeah.
keep the rest of the nutrients in your body
In
to
your
heal.
body. Yeah, I mean that's critical. I mean, I again, like I would think that I would have known that like my bone density was depleted every time I was breastfeeding my babies in that time period. I mean, I have 5 kids and I breastfed all of them for over a year. And so that's a
Wow.
whole lot of time. And, I was just thinking as you were talking, like, I wonder if like the whole osteoporosis epidemic is that because we know that our American diet is crap. And
Yeah.
so like if you are women do breastfeed and extended breastfeeding, which is beautiful, but not knowing what you just said is like what that's doing to like our longevity of our health. I mean, you'll stop and think like, okay, maybe I don't need like to go buy a second freezer because I have so much breast milk. Like, what is
Yeah,
this
maybe we don't
about?
need to. Exactly. And it also, like for me, Ashley, everything goes back to the cultural expectations of how
Oh.
we relate to our children. So if we
Mm-hmm.
have a cultural expectation of a woman to separate from her child at a very young age, to express milk so that that child can be fed her breast milk away from her while she's doing something else. And this creates this anxiety in women of, oh my God, well, what if there's not enough, right? What if there's not
Mm-hmm.
enough milk
Yep.
for baby? I'm in Canada, so we do have higher breastfeeding rates than the US
Mm-hmm.
because we get 12 to 18 months of paid maternity leave, and you guys get
Wow.
like zero.
Yeah. 6 weeks is
Yeah.
average. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I think that's unpaid. So even then,
Yeah. I
the
mean,
ability,
it's very inconsistent. I mean, 6 to
yeah,
12 weeks, depending on where you work, is you can have it paid, or at some point maybe you'll get like your disability will kick in and you'll get portion of
okay,
your, but I mean, it's like 12 weeks is a luxury. Like if you have 12
yeah.
weeks of paid maternity leave, that's a luxury.
And
Yeah.
that makes me feel like it's hard not to get tears in my eyes just thinking
Uh-huh.
about that, because at 12 weeks, like
Where were
I
you? Right.
I could not have been away from my baby. Like absolutely. It's not even a possibility. I would have rather lived under a bridge than gone
Yeah.
back to work, right? The
Mm-hmm.
thought of any
Mm-hmm.
woman not having to leave her baby and not want to do that makes me feel like I have a physical reaction to it.
Yeah.
And if we are so focused on normalizing this, like pumping the milk and filling the freezer and having all this milk for just in case for all this time that you're away from your baby, we need to always take a step back from the cultural norms and ask, is this biologically appropriate? And I don't just mean in
Mm-hmm.
motherhood. I do this
Yeah.
in general.
Yeah. Yeah.
Once you learn the language of the body, it's hard not to feel like you are an alien on some strange planet that makes absolutely no sense to you.
So
So
true. It's
it
so
does go
true.
back to that. Like you kind of do need to fill the freezer, or you feel like you need to fill the freezer
Yeah.
and have an oversupply
Mm-hmm.
if you have this threat looming of you're going to have to be away from your baby. And the thought of your baby not having the food that you want them to have is the most terrifying thought that you could have in that early
Absolutely.
postpartum, right? So
Right. Absolutely.
I think that's actually the root of all the nervous system issues. We can go outside as much as we want, but if we've got that looming over us,
Hmm. Hmm.
there's a cultural reckoning that needs to happen here.
For sure, for sure. Absolutely. And I mean, moms are feeling like things are out of control. And so that they do feel like one thing they can control is how much milk they provide for their baby.
Yeah.
So, they have to go back to family, incomes are what seems to be the norm. And so, they feel like the best that they can do is to provide their milk to their babies. But, I think that that's a myth that we need to like speak truth into that
Hmm.
that's not all like roses and butterflies. So,
Yeah.
are there any other myths that we should be aware of, like that you see, like that's impacting breastfeeding, infant feeding, like that mom's journey with that?
I think another one is this whole idea that there's like a time limit. Like babies don't need breast milk after 6 months
Mm-hmm.
or a
Mm-hmm.
year or
Mm-hmm.
whatever it
Yeah.
is. We look at term breastfeeding in other primates and
Yeah.
that are, large and have shorter lifespans than us because we have a really long lifespan for a primate. But in a large primate with a lifespan similar to humans, we have term breastfeeding of like 3 to 7 years. And
Mm-hmm.
yet for humans, even though the World Health Organization says minimum 2 years, like breastfeed at least until 2 years, and then beyond that, it's kind of confusing the way they word things. I believe that you guys in the US, your government doesn't even echo the World Health Organization. I think for you guys, they say 1 year.
I mean, yeah, and if you get to that, like you're really like we're cheering from the
It's like 10
rooftops.
to 15%, I think, are
Yeah.
even
Oh, it's
breastfeeding
very, very minimal.
still.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Very
And I know
minimal.
you guys have federal protection, so they have to provide you, time
Hmm.
and space to pump, but that's only up to 12 months. So you're not even supported
Hmm.
to meet the World Health Organization recommendations. And pediatricians are also, for some reason, a
Hmm.
huge source
Hmm.
of misinformation around this. Even
Hmm.
in Canada, I talk to women who have pediatricians telling them, if you're breastfeeding past a year, it's like giving your baby a cigarette or like it's bad for them.
It's
So I
crazy.
think
It's
that's
crazy.
the number one thing. Breast milk never stops being beneficial. As someone who is working in gastrointestinal health and working with adults on their metabolic health, it is, I think it's like a platitude to say, oh, no one can tell who's breastfed and who's not by the time, they're in college. And I
Yeah.
get it. And it is
Right.
reassuring if you didn't have a breastfeeding journey that went the way that you
Right.
wanted to, like that can be
Right.
incredibly comforting. And I hold space for that absolutely, while also
Hmm.
telling you that yes, we can.
Hmm.
We can
Hmm.
absolutely tell by looking at an adult's gut and metabolic health. The people who were not breastfed are having a much
Hmm.
harder time, and that's really heartbreaking, but
It
we
is.
still do need to talk about that.
Hmm.
So breast milk never stops being beneficial for in length or in quantity, right? Like every drop counts. Whatever
Counts.
you can do is
Yes.
incredible. Like
Yes.
getting any breast milk into your baby is
Hmm.
undoubtedly beneficial, regardless of how old they are, regardless of what percentage of their diet the breast milk actually is. It is never not beneficial to give your baby breast milk.
Absolutely. I was talking about that with a mom yesterday who she's like, I just want to breastfeed just so my baby can have like the immune supports. And
Hmm.
my baby's super fussy. I'm thinking about switching to formula. I'm like, well, why don't we like give your baby some time? Like, okay, you're going back to work and you're gonna have to introduce formula. Well, like how can we balance it out where yes, your baby's getting some formula, but you're still giving your baby as much breast milk as you can produce and your baby can take in that feels like it's a good sustainable place. So I do like what you said, like
Yeah.
any amount is beneficial.
When we
So
decide that when we decide that breast milk is really important, we are
yeah.
going to take steps individually and then eventually collectively to protect it. But if we are
Yes.
so focused on the like fed is best, it doesn't really
Mm-hmm.
matter, no one can tell once they're in
Yeah.
kindergarten, If
Yeah,
we
so
are
true.
clinging on to that, then we're
Mhm.
actually not protecting
Dang it. Hmm.
breastfeeding, which is the most
Hmm.
important thing to do, even if you don't do it however you hoped you
Right.
would, or however
Exactly.
other people think you should, or
Exactly.
whatever perfect means. Like any
Hmm.
amount is incredible. It's the best thing that you could be giving to your baby,
Absolutely.
even if it's 3 drops a day, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so true. So true. So I want to understand like the person who comes into your world, like this mom, whatever her concerns are, and like what does that transformation look like? Like when she comes to you with these struggles, but then she has this radical transformation. Like what does that look like? Explain that to me.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I get to see a lot of incredible health transformations in my work.
Okay.
And I think
Okay.
that like those stories are the ones that get the most PR in my industry.
Mm-hmm.
And I love those. But I think the thing that I love the most about this work and the thing that consistently gets me out of bed to do it and reminds me of why I do this work is
Mm-hmm.
actually what happens before the measurable transformation,
Okay.
which is the exhale and the
Mm.
relaxing that I see happen in a woman at the cellular
So
level
true.
when she realizes that she can trust her body, when
So
she
beautiful.
like when we
So
make those connections
beautiful.
that, hey, this is why you're having that symptom, this is why your body is doing
Yes.
that thing, when we connect and almost get them speaking the same language, and when mothers realize that there's actually a deep
Yeah.
intelligence woven into their cells and that there's wisdom
Yes.
there worth listening to and that their instincts are the
Yes.
best compass that they'll ever have. It's that feeling when I am speaking to a woman, even if it's our first time talking, or even if I'm just reviewing test results and she hasn't implemented a protocol to see like a transformation, but
Mm-hmm.
I get to see her transform in that moment when she looks at her own health story from a different angle, when I can help kind of pick her up and show her the big picture versus just the little individual pieces that she was looking at. And the
Mm-hmm.
light in her eyes when she realizes I'm actually not broken. This all makes
Yes.
perfect sense. Like that is the transformation that gets me really fired up. And that's what I want for
Yes.
every single woman. That's the real medicine.
Absolutely. And every mama comes into my world, they all think it's their fault. They're struggling because it's their fault. And so
Yeah.
I can relate to that exhale that I get to see when they realize that it's not my fault, that there's something going on. There's some level of oral dysfunction going on in my baby's
Yeah.
mouth and body. And there's something we can do. And we're going to see quick progress, and to see that mom just come back to center to realize that like she is not the one that is broken is just beautiful, because that's where the healing can
Yeah.
start. It's where it can
Absolutely.
start.
And even for her to get there with you, she
Hmm.
had to trust her instincts. I think,
Exactly.
right? Like she had to get past
Exactly.
the number of people that say, no, everything's fine, or, well, whatever, if it's
Hmm.
hard, just, give a bottle instead, or whatever it is.
Hmm.
Like in order to even get to that place with you, she had to take the step of trusting her instincts
Absolutely.
and then to have that validated that I trusted my instincts and there was something going on. And now I have support and now I have a plan. Like that is the medicine. It's actually
Yes,
not
that's
what happens after that. It's
right.
actually that process that's the
Absolutely.
medicine.
It's so true. It's so true. Well, and so like going back to what you just said, like trusting their gut to get to me,
Mhm.
that there's a lot of noise around that, like in the conventional, oh, that feeding therapy humbug, that doesn't really do much.
Really?
You know, it's not, there's some pediatricians that are like, yes, like there's so much support there, but then others are just like, oh, they'll outgrow it, or oh, just start bottle feeding, or just put
Yeah.
them on reflux medication.
Yeah.
So like from your standpoint, I mean, I know that I am constantly trying to empower the mom with good information, but like where are you, like how are you debunking and like wading the waters between that conventional medicine and like the holistic world and the support that you can offer?
Yeah, that's a good question. It is a really difficult line to walk. And I think one of the things that makes it so challenging is that the whole process of getting into and graduating from medical school is really preferentially appealing and kind of selects for highly competitive people who don't necessarily have a
Mm-hmm.
collaborative mindset. And I think that
Mm-hmm.
that needs to be addressed at a systemic level. That is the
Mm-hmm.
key thing that I think is broken in the system
Mm-hmm. So true.
because the thing I always tell my clients when they're like, oh, but my doctor said that, like herbs aren't safe or whatever. I always say I can appreciate that. If I asked a plumber if they think electricity is safe, they would probably say no. Um,
So true.
they would say, no, I don't really feel safe working with that. You should talk to an electrician. But what they wouldn't say is
Hey,
electricity isn't safe. You shouldn't have it at all. So it is sort of a matter of making sure that you remember who you are asking for advice about what and whether or not that person is educated and qualified to give it to you. I am not going to tell
bingo.
somebody which antibiotic they should take or whether or not they should take antibiotics for an infection.
Absolutely.
That would be insane, right?
Mm-hmm.
That would be
Mm-hmm.
the hubris of that would
Would.
be like
Yeah.
embarrassing to me.
Right. Right.
But yet, someone who didn't study herbs and who hasn't even read the research on it half the time will confidently answer questions about it. So just
Mm-hmm.
keep in mind the toolbox. The way that I navigate kind of bridging the gap between these two systems is a lot of asking what feels right to you, what feels
Mm-hmm.
true to you. And a lot of reminding mothers that they are allowed to accept or decline any care, any intervention, anything that is offered to them by any health professional, regardless of what letters come after their name.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that just basic informed consent and trying to keep that alive is the main work that I am doing.
Yeah.
Obviously, I've got my scope of practice, but
Yeah.
when it comes to, questions that my clients come to me with about engaging with the medical system, it's just a lot of navigating them back to their instincts and reminding them that this is not mandatory. You don't have to participate in any of this any more than you do in any other aspect of
So
society.
true.
Like this is a menu. You can pick and
Yeah,
choose what
you
you want
choose what
from
you
it.
want. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Absolutely. So if a mom is listening to this and she's gonna walk away with something, like what's one thing you want her to remember?
Your nourishment matters. You're the soil that
Hmm.
your family is going to grow from, and there is nothing more worthy of nourishment than that.
Absolutely. It's perfect. So simple and beautiful. So important. Absolutely. Well, how can people find you? Because I've learned so much and I want to be able to get people connected with you all the way up in
Thank you.
Canada.
Yeah. So probably the best place to connect with me is on my Instagram. You can find me there at Ashley Wulkan. I have a clinic website, thegutclinic.ca. We've got some good info up there around, basic kind of gut health stuff.
Hmm.
But I've also been on mat leave for about 10 months. So
Yeah.
the most alive and informative place to access my work right now is through Instagram.
Perfect. So great. So great. Well, thank you so much. This has been such a valuable experience for me. And I can think of already the way that just even the moms I spoke to this week, like how I would have maybe reworded things if I had talked to you before I had
Mm.
conversations with them. So this is going to be valuable for the way that I'm able to support families, and just having you as a resource is going to be wonderful. So thank you again for coming on today. I really appreciate you.
Thank you so much. What an absolute honor and what a beautiful thing to hear. Yeah, I'm glad. I love that the Ashley W's could
Yeah,
come
you
and
could connect.
could
I
come
love
and bust
it.
some myths and support the mamas.
That's awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I hope you found this episode on the feeding solutions helpful. If you would like more information, please follow Sensory Solutions on Facebook or Instagram, or you can always visit our website at www.sensorysolutionsTherapy.com. Thanks so much for joining today, and look forward to seeing you next time.